Hello, everybody. Dmitry, thank you for your nice introduction. You kind of summarized nicely what has transpired over the last few months after Mr. Trump became president again. And obviously, these questions that we're about to discuss, or we started discussing, it's something that immigration attorneys like myself hear pretty much daily from clients. Prospective clients, etc. Right now, I guess one good word to use would be uncertainty. And that's what we feel like happening in the migration area overall, and not only vis-a-vis the Ukrainians. USCIS basically paused. They using the word, I guess, administrative pause for all TPS, asylum, adjustment of status, and other migration benefits for parolees. In case of Ukrainians, it's U for you, that's the name for the program, but at the end of the day, the person gets paroled in. So what the nature of parole overall? Basically, somebody is allowed to be in the United States for a temporary purpose, and it does not confer any additional immigration status as such. As opposed, for instance, for TPS, and oftentimes they overlap TPS and parole. If you're in the United States, you could be either admitted or paroled in, or basically present without being admitted or paroled. So parolees, they're not admitted, they're just present here pursuant to this parole. They didn't take parole from U4U people who came using the U4U program. It hasn't been done. It's only temporary pause right now. However, all the applications and everything else what was filed by people who came in as U4U right now is on a pause. What it means is that immigration officer cannot, in theory, issue a final decision on the case until this pause is lifted. Again, it's supposed to be only temporary. And again, when I use the word uncertainty, because nobody knows, I don't have to say the current administration is rather unpredictable with its actions and statements. So we don't know what the actual decision will be. However, there are some types of cases that as an immigration attorney, I will say it doesn't really matter, and I have these cases myself. For instance, somebody entered on U4U, correct, and the person then marries a U.S. citizen. The parole is sufficient for this person to apply for what we call adjustment of status, regardless of what decision will be made about U4U. I will argue that somebody who has already been paroled in, whether it's part of U4U or different parole program, doesn't really matter, because the person has been paroled in, and if this person applies for adjustment of status as an immediate relative of U.S. citizen, let's say based on marriage to U.S. citizen, okay? So it's this absolutely 100% legitimate basis to apply. We've done this many times, so I know for sure that one type of application, whatever they want to decide, they will have to approve these cases. Why? Because you are paroled in, and it's a sufficient basis to file for adjustment of status as an immediate relative, which would be parents of U.S. citizens, if U.S. citizen 21 and older, spouses of U.S. citizens, and unmarried children under 21. They shouldn't be affected even if temporarily it's on pause. In fact, we had one case approved after they already announced this pause, and then we received the approval and actually green card for somebody. I don't know whether it was some kind of how it happened, but it did happen. They paused TPS applications as well. A few days before Biden left the office, he renewed TPS for Ukraine. So now we have an interesting situation. So TPS for Ukraine is renewed through October of 2026. They put this pause saying like, okay, we renewed TPS, but we can't approve it yet. Although, like I said, I'm aware of one situation that when USCIS was sued over this TPS just recently, and clients got approved through October 2026 during this time with this pause has still in effect. So how much longer it's gonna last, we don't know. But again, what I'm trying to say that this is only temporary. Some applications shouldn't be affected no matter what happens, perhaps a small number. Other people, those who decide to stay, obviously looking for other options. One of them to consider would be application for asylum. I'm very kind of sensitive about this, and as a strict legal matter, the fact that there is a war going on in Ukraine, unfortunately, that's not sufficient just as a kind of blank reason to apply for asylum. Why somebody would have to think twice before filing this application for any application for asylum, not to like cross this line, which is, well, it's actually quite a bright line, frivolous applications, because you cannot just, okay, I'll file just an application and then see what happens. You would have to show some fear. There would have to be some connection to your government of your country. Why people from Ukraine, it's not as easy to get an asylum even if the war is going on, because again, asylum is not designed as a mechanism to be like open-ended for everybody, let's say, from a country that there is a war going on. That's why there is programs like parole program for people temporarily to be in the United States, for instance, which for unknown reason, well, we can guess the reasons, the current administration is kind of, I guess, has issues with. With asylum, you would still have to show connection to the government of Ukraine, that your government can't or unwilling or unable to protect you, one of the protected bases. One of the reasons for asylum, which is used right now, that actually would be claim of genocide. I mean, there's plenty of proof to show that the Putin regime, that their real purpose is to basically destroy Ukraine, to remove Ukraine from the political map of the world, so to speak, and basically kill Ukrainians kill us as an ethnicity. So that's a pure genocide, and some are using this basis to apply for asylum. So again, asylum is absolutely available. People do know that one of the requirements for asylum is to file within 1 year of physical entry into the United States. However, if somebody has status right now, like if we're talking about people who came with U4U, which there would be parolees, they're in parole right now, so that shouldn't be an issue even if you file, let's say, after the parole program is terminated, because you've been in status before it works in practice. I can tell you from my experience. So asylum, something that it's always somebody could consider filing, although one needs to be careful with this. There are two types of asylum applications. One is called affirmative asylum. That's when, let's say, person right now is in status or no status, but he is not, let's say, in immigration court in removal proceedings. Then this application for asylum would be filed through USCIS. It would be called affirmative asylum application. At some point, the applicant would be called for the actual interview at the asylum office, and we don't know how soon it's going to be. Back in 2018, was for 1 year or a couple of years right before the pandemic. They introduced the system last in, first out. So people who would apply for asylum, they would absolutely within 60 days would have their interview. And then pandemic happened, and now there are some cases still waiting for 10 years. There are some cases that called in 1 year or so. Meanwhile, it's a known fact, the applicant can apply and get their employment authorization document while waiting for the interview. But asylum, what I would call, it's like all in, basically. If you file for asylum, that's going to be, first of all, it may take a long time for the case to be resolved, number one. Number two, you don't know when next time you're going to be able to travel, because with asylum, you're not going to be able to get some kind of travel document. One needs to be careful right now with this increased activities with immigration enforcement. Some Ukrainians could be unfortunately subjected to this, or they could be considered for this expedited removal if they pull the parole, and all of a sudden there are over 200,000 people out of status. So if somebody had been in the United States for less than 2 years out of status, they can consider this person for expedited removal. Okay, so without even the immigration judge just immigration officer. Now, if somebody already an applicant for asylum, then they can't remove them before the asylum applications are adjudicated. They can obviously put this person in immigration court. The judge would have to consider this application, but again, that's one more reason that somebody might want to consider applying for asylum. If there's like enough basis for this, it should also more or less I'm not saying guarantee from being deported. This is something to keep in mind right now, nowadays. People who already had TPS. So when they applied for renewal right now and they file for renewal of their employment authorization document, they will get automatic extension through TPS. Even if TPS is still pending, if there is a pause, you do get automatic extension for 540 days. But again, each case needs to be considered separately. There was a bill introduced I want to say the 23, if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine Adjustment Act was kind of modeled on this Cuban Adjustment Act, that people after 1 year who paroled in from Ukraine could apply for permanent residency, basically to get green cards. But it was obvious from the get-go, there was like no support for that bill. It didn't go anywhere. And given the current political climate, we don't expect any legislative fix which would somehow help people, let's say, who parolees or from Ukraine, who would be able somehow to apply and become permanent residents in the United States. I don't expect any such legislative fix within in the near future. Let's put it this way. I kind of covered what's kind of main issues, I believe. So perhaps it would be easier for me just kind of to answer questions.
There are some questions in the chat. I think the first one is in Ukrainian. Чи може людина?
There's a first question was Yulia Myers was in Ukrainian, and basically the question is that somebody who here on U4U and this person does not have TPS, can they apply for adjustment of status in the United States, or they need to step outside the United States for the interview in case of DV lottery selection? So this one I think I can enter easily. So there's this whole question about, yes, adjustment of status and who would be eligible. I just gave one example, one situation which is 100% covered by law regardless of what they're doing right now, that somebody is paroled in and then they become what we call an immediate relative of US citizen, okay? So like I already described who those people are. In this kind of situation, people, even if they entered over U4U, and even in practice, even during the big war, I already had several cases. They can file for adjustment of status only as immediate relatives. If somebody won this DV lottery, entered on U4U, no TPS, it's not even a question. The person would have to step outside the United States and go for their interview at the U.S. consulate, wherever it's scheduled. In Kyiv, Ukraine, actually, they started issuing immigrant visas right now. So unfortunately, in this kind of situation, there is no chance to do this in the United States through adjustment of status. Because there are two ways to apply for a green card as two different procedures or two different processes. One is called adjustment of status. That's when somebody applies here in the United States without having to go anywhere. The other one is called consulate processing. That when the applicant would have to appear, like I said, at the U.S. consulate. If it's from Ukraine, most likely it's going to be in Kyiv. And then the applicant would get a so-called immigrant visa, which is when you enter, you're admitted, and you become permanent resident at that moment. Yeah, but in this case, it would have to be, somebody would have to travel outside. There's a question, actually, what protection does TPS currently provide to Ukrainians? Is there a risk that TPS might be terminated if the U.S. administration changes? What will happen to Ukrainians whose TPS is still pending if humanitarian parole is cancelled? Is it possible to maintain a pending TPS status while also extending humanitarian parole? What are China's recommendations? So basically, to answer this question, so TPS and parole, two different statuses. People oftentimes would have both, and I would recommend those who can, absolutely. Let's say when the only U4U was introduced, we knew that to get some benefits, some insurance, etc. It was only part of parole program. So that's why often people would get parole and, well, I mean, they would be in parole and they would also apply for TPS. TPS is actually, this status, temporary protected status, is actually regulated by, it's in the INA, Immigration Nationality Act. It does give you protection basically from what Ukrainians have, as anybody else who in TPS would have, is basically temporary protected status with the United States. Government cannot remove this person from the United States, cannot deport the person from the United States. In fact, I can give you an example. One country that's a good example of a TPS, which already had it for more than 20 years, El Salvador. It's a known fact that when TPS was introduced for people from El Salvador, some of them already had final orders of removal. And then even having final orders of removal, but if you have TPS, you can still obtain a travel document. And I know myself clients who would have final order of removal with TPS from El Salvador. They would travel and come back, no issues. I read this question, if there is the TPS might be terminated. Yes, there's always risk that TPS may be terminated. And I'm not going to be overly surprised if TPS is terminated for Ukrainians, although that would be absolutely horrible because there is no justification. What, everything is fine in Ukraine, everybody is ready to go back. I mean, it's I don't have to explain this one, but I'll give you an example. As you may know, I think it was January 18th of this year or 17th, just literally two or three days before Biden's last day in office, okay? And he renewed, as you remember, extended TPS for Venezuela. And what did the Trump administration do once when he got inaugurated? On the 22nd, they just removed this TPS for Venezuela. So, I mean, the same would happen to Ukraine, although I think, Ukraine is a bit different from Venezuela right now. So it is possible that, let's say, if they cancel the whole humanitarian parole for Ukrainians who already have it, but they already have TPS, those have TPS, then they will rely on their TPS. If they decide to cancel both parole and TPS, that's a different issue. It is possible in theory that parole is canceled, but TPS still available, and TPS would still protect these people. Yeah, it is possible to maintain pending TPS, extending humanitarian parole. That's what people have been doing. And if it's, my recommendation would be keep doing this if it's available. If it becomes available or it's still available, both TPS and parole, absolutely. You just renew both. Employment-based adjustment of status. Somebody gets a foreign labor certification approved, okay? So EB2 or EB3. Last person trying to get their green card through work. So the question becomes, can they, after approval of immigrant petition, I-140, whether they can apply for adjustment in the United States? Most cases, the answer is no, unless they had TPS, obtained a travel document, and left the United States and entered using this TPS travel document. Then there's no questions, okay? So again, all of these options are available. Oftentimes, it's the question is it available to adjust your status or change your status, depends on what it is in the United States, or you have to step outside the United States. Has the United for Ukraine program truly been eliminated, or there are still possibilities for extensions of the renewed participation? There's always possibility. Right now, the way I understand it, it's just on pause as well. So nobody can apply, and they can keep it like this for the next 4 years. Who knows? Or perhaps something will change, and perhaps they will reopen. Perhaps they will modify it. We do not know.